The room fell silent as the lawyer cleared his throat and announced the figures. Kira's eyes sparkled as the number $6.7 million hit the air, while my heart sank seeing my inheritance, a single dollar. Dad leaned back in his chair, smirking. Now you'll learn some responsibility. As Mom's lips curled in that familiar sneer. You were always the disappointment anyway. My cheeks burned, humiliation twisting into anger, and for a moment I could barely breathe. Every memory of being overlooked, every slight and sarcastic comment, came crashing back. It wasn't just about the money. It was the confirmation of what I had long suspected. They never truly believed in me. Kira barely looked my way, caught up in her own excitement, while I tried to shrink into the corner, wondering how a lifetime of being second best had led to this moment. Grandpa's will had always been a mystery, but I never imagined this level of cruelty hiding behind the family name. My parents' smirks were like knives, carving through every shred of dignity I had left. And yet, under the sting of betrayal, a flicker of something else began to grow, a quiet, simmering determination that this wouldn't be the end of my story. As the lawyer shuffled papers, he pulled out a sealed letter, and my pulse quickened. Grandpa had always been unpredictable, and I sensed there was more beneath the surface than my parents wanted anyone to see. While they were basking in Kira's triumph and mocking my worthless inheritance, I realized that patience might be my greatest weapon. I could let them think they had won, or I could start quietly collecting the pieces I needed to turn the tables. In that moment, the humiliation and betrayal fused with a new clarity. I would not let this define me. They might have laughed, they might have sneered, but every underestimation they had made about me had just given me the edge I needed. And deep down, I knew this story was far from over, because sometimes the real power lies in the quiet, calculated rise after everyone assumes you're down for good. From as far back as I could remember, Kira was always the shining star. Birthday parties, school achievements, even casual compliments, they all went to her. Every success of mine was met with indifference, or a sharp reminder that I would never live up to expectations. Why can't you be more like your sister? Mom would sigh, while Dad offered a disappointed shake of his head. Their words weren't just comments. They were a constant echo that I was inadequate, unworthy, and always a step behind. Even small victories felt hollow because they were never truly mine to celebrate. Kira's every accomplishment was paraded, magnified, and praised endlessly, while mine were minimized, forgotten, or criticized. It wasn't just favoritism. It was deliberate, a lesson drilled into me that I would never measure up. The subtle insults, the eye rolls, the whispered comparisons to Kira, they all piled up like bricks, pressing me down, shaping a resentment that grew quietly but fiercely inside me. It hurt in ways that weren't easy to name. Family dinners, holidays, and casual weekends all became reminders that I was never enough. I learned to mask my hurt with forced smiles, pretending to celebrate Kira's triumphs while quietly absorbing the sting. And yet, that constant belittling did more than wound. It sharpened me. Somewhere beneath the humiliation, a small, defiant part of me began to thrive. It whispered that the world could not always define my worth. I realized that the injustice I faced wasn't just unfair. It was exploitable. The imbalance, the arrogance, the constant underestimation by my parents, they were all openings, waiting for someone who knew how to turn them into leverage. Slowly, the anger simmered into strategy. The realization that I had been underestimated my entire life planted a seed deep within me. The determination to reclaim power, to outmaneuver the very people who had spent decades diminishing me. It was a bitter recognition, but a clear one. Their favoritism and my exclusion had created a spark of resolve I could no longer ignore. And in that spark, I felt the first flickers of a plan, a quiet rebellion forming that would eventually reshape everything they thought they controlled. As the initial shock of the will began to settle, the lawyer's hand dipped into the pile of documents once more. He withdrew a thick envelope, sealed with Grandpa's distinct wax stamp, and the room fell into a tense hush. No one had expected this. My parents' confident smirks faltered for just a fraction of a second. Grandpa had always been unpredictable, and the presence of this secret message hinted at a twist they hadn't anticipated. I felt a shiver of anticipation. The envelope seemed to hum with possibility, as if it contained the answer to questions I hadn't dared voice aloud for years. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their composure cracking ever so slightly. It was clear this wasn't part of their carefully rehearsed narrative. Grandpa had left a puzzle, a hidden piece of the family story that they had hoped would remain buried. The lawyer's eyes flicked toward each of us, his expression grave yet deliberate, heightening the suspense. Every subtle movement, the clearing of a throat, the soft rustle of paper, amplified the tension, making it impossible to ignore that something monumental was about to unfold. My pulse quickened. Whatever lay inside that envelope, it was powerful enough to challenge the very foundations of the family's carefully curated hierarchy. I noticed Kira fidgeting, a rare crack in her normally confident demeanor. Even Dad, who had radiated authority moments before, glanced at Mom with a fleeting uncertainty. It was the first time in years that their smug certainty seemed vulnerable. Grandpa had orchestrated this moment with precision, ensuring that the family's arrogance would be tested at the exact point of maximum impact. I felt a surge of quiet hope mingled with curiosity. This letter could change everything, shift the balance of power, reveal truths long concealed, and expose the favoritism that had defined my childhood. As the lawyer lifted the seal, I braced myself, aware that the room's atmosphere had shifted irreversibly. Whatever was inside, the coming revelation promised to disrupt the status quo. And for the first time in my life, I sensed that I might not be powerless after all. As the lawyer carefully broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter, the words inside struck like a thunderclap. Kira's inheritance wasn't unconditional. Certain responsibilities, obligations carefully outlined by Grandpa, had to be fulfilled, rules she had already ignored. Her excitement faltered as her confident smile wavered, though she tried to hide it behind a nervous laugh. The truth was unavoidable. Her windfall was precarious, hanging by threads she had already allowed to fray. My eyes scanned the letter further, and a different revelation jolted me even more. Grandpa had quietly set aside a substantial trust in my name, a hidden fund designed to empower me, to give me independence and opportunity. It had been deliberately concealed by my parents, who feared the leverage it would give me over the family's affairs. The realization that Grandpa had believed in me when my own parents had dismissed me ignited a surge of determination. For the first time, I understood that I had been underestimated in a way that could now work in my favor. I felt a thrill of possibility, but I knew this wasn't a moment for impulsive action. The room was still, my parents too distracted by Kira's shaky confidence to notice my calculated resolve. I tucked the letter carefully, a tangible reminder that I now held the key to reshaping the family dynamic. Quietly, I began to consider the steps I would need to take, the information I could gather, the allies I could quietly enlist. Every slight, every condescending remark they had ever made now became ammunition for a carefully orchestrated plan. I realized I needed to be patient. This was not about immediate confrontation. It was about strategy, precision, and timing. Every move had to be measured, every revelation positioned to maximize impact. As my mind raced through possibilities, I felt a sense of clarity I had never experienced before. Grandpa's foresight had given me not just resources, but insight, and I would not squander either. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile inwardly, knowing that the scales of power were quietly shifting. The family's smug certainty was about to face consequences they hadn't even imagined, and I would ensure that every step of the unfolding story worked in my favor. I knew rushing into confrontation would be foolish, so I began to move carefully, like a shadow weaving through the family's world unnoticed. Every conversation, every interaction became a potential source of insight. I started quietly tracking transactions, cross-referencing statements, and noting inconsistencies that hinted at my parents' manipulations. What they thought were mundane details became my tools, fragments of a puzzle I was determined to solve. To gain deeper access, I nurtured relationships with those who handled the family's affairs. The lawyer, always courteous but distant, became someone I engaged with under the guise of curiosity about the estate. The accountant, meticulous and precise, received my questions framed innocently enough to avoid suspicion. Slowly, I pieced together information they had never intended for me to see. Every ledger, every memorandum, every overlooked detail fed into a growing picture of control, deceit, and favoritism that had been hidden from me. Meanwhile, in front of my parents, I wore the mask they expected. I expressed gratitude for the inheritance, downplayed my ambitions, and mirrored the humility they assumed defined me. They smiled, satisfied that I was meek and harmless, completely unaware that beneath my calm demeanor, plans were forming. Each compliment they offered, each patronizing remark, only reinforced the illusion while giving me further insight into their blind arrogance. Every meeting, every family gathering became a stage where I could observe and gather intelligence. I memorized routines, noted patterns, and cataloged weaknesses. I understood that the smallest errors or oversights on their part could become leverage, and patience would be my greatest ally. By pretending contentment, I shielded my true intentions, letting the world believe I had accepted my position while quietly constructing the framework for my strategy. The tension within me grew. Not panic, but a controlled intensity, a hunger for the moment when preparation would intersect with opportunity. The stage was set, and I was ready to move with precision, knowing that the quiet accumulation of knowledge and influence would soon give me the upper hand. Kira wasted no time showing off her new wealth, posting pictures, bragging to distant relatives, and hosting extravagant gatherings that left everyone else feeling small. Every expensive dress, every flashy accessory, every boastful comment was a reminder of how completely she had been handed the spotlight. My parents basked in her triumph, their pride bordering on smugness, and they seemed to revel in my quiet frustration. At social events, I became the subject of whispered jokes and pointed remarks. They laughed at my modest attire, commented on my career choices, and subtly highlighted how unambitious I appeared. Friends and acquaintances watched the dynamics with polite interest, unaware of the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. Each mockery, each smirk, reinforced their sense of superiority, making them oblivious to the meticulous plans I had been assembling in secret. It was astonishing how blind arrogance could make people. Every overconfident gesture, every dismissive comment from them, fed into my strategy. While they focused on flaunting Kira's windfall and belittling me, they were unwittingly exposing their vulnerabilities. Their self-satisfaction blinded them to the careful observation, the calculations, and the quiet manipulation I had been orchestrating. I began to see patterns in their behavior, habits, overconfidence, and predictable reactions that I could exploit. Their laughter and displays of wealth were no longer just insults, they were tools. Each instance of arrogance was another crack in the armor they believed was impenetrable. The more they flaunted and mocked, the more I realized that their overconfidence was my greatest advantage. In their eyes, I remained powerless and insignificant, the perfect cover for the careful measures I was putting into motion. I smiled inwardly, aware that the very pride they celebrated would soon be the element that allowed me to reclaim the balance they thought they had secured forever. I began creating situations that seemed accidental, but were meticulously designed to expose cracks in Kira's confidence. Invitations to gatherings and charity events became stages where her lack of preparation or understanding of finer details would surface naturally. I made sure key friends and business associates witnessed moments that highlighted her ignorance, her entitlement, and the gaps in her knowledge. Each slip, each misstep, subtly shifted perceptions in my favor, without a single word of accusation leaving my lips. Behind the scenes, I navigated legal and financial technicalities with quiet precision. Clauses, deadlines, and procedural requirements became instruments I could leverage to delay or complicate Kira's access to her inheritance. It was never about sabotage that could be traced directly to me. It was about nudging events so that the consequences fell where they were most revealing. The more I observed, the more I realized how much my parents' negligence and overconfidence had left open opportunities one could exploit. Every interaction I orchestrated was layered, requiring patience and foresight. While Kira stumbled through public appearances and business dealings, I maintained composure, offering assistance that seemed casual and harmless, but actually reinforced her dependence on the very family that underestimated me. I watched as influential contacts began questioning her competence, noticing how the facade of privilege could crack under scrutiny. My parents, still absorbed in their own superiority, failed to detect the undercurrent of my maneuvers. Their laughter, their praise for Kira's supposed brilliance, only made my subtle influence more effective. I realized that true strength wasn't in confrontation or loud declarations. It was in quiet calculation, observation, and careful orchestration. With each day, I refined my approach, weaving minor disruptions and strategic guidance together. The contrast between their reckless arrogance and my deliberate actions became increasingly stark. I moved like a shadow in their world, invisible yet impactful, letting the consequences of their overconfidence unfold while I remained composed, intelligent, and fully in control of the unfolding story. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, without fanfare. I gathered every document, every note, every record that revealed the patterns of favoritism, the hidden allocations, and Kira's oversights. Each piece of evidence was organized meticulously, a narrative that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. When I walked into the family study, I carried not just papers, but the weight of years of calculation, patience, and careful observation. I asked for a private meeting, insisting it was urgent. My parents exchanged amused glances, assuming it would be another minor complaint or childish protest. Kira, still reveling in her recent successes, barely looked up, confident she was untouchable. But as I laid the documents on the polished table, arranged deliberately, the air shifted. One by one, I presented the proof. The trust Grandpa had set aside for me, the inconsistencies in Kira's fulfillment of her obligations, the patterns of favoritism that had shaped our lives. Their faces changed slowly, disbelief blooming into panic. Mom's lips pressed tight, Dad's smirk faltered, and for the first time in decades, their certainty wavered. Kira's confident posture crumpled as she realized the precariousness of her position. Every boast, every public display of superiority, now seemed hollow under the scrutiny of evidence. I didn't need to shout or plead. The documents spoke louder than any words I could muster. Each revelation was precise, undeniable, and strategically presented to leave no room for excuse. Their carefully constructed image of control and power cracked visibly, exposing the depth of manipulation they had employed for years. In that moment, the balance shifted entirely. The arrogance and mockery that had defined our household dissolved, replaced by the tension of exposure and accountability. For the first time, I saw the fear and uncertainty in their eyes, mirrored by Kira's realization that privilege alone could not shield her from consequence. The confrontation was not just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about holding truth above pretense and making the family confront the reality they had long denied. With the confrontation behind me, I moved decisively to activate Grandpa's trust. The legal process was straightforward now that I had every document in order, every condition fulfilled. Signing the final papers felt surreal, a quiet triumph after years of feeling powerless. For the first time, I could step into my life on my own terms, free from the weight of favoritism, judgment, and manipulation. Kira's reaction was immediate and telling. The sudden restrictions on her inheritance, combined with the exposure of her shortcomings, left her flustered and defensive. Her confidence crumbled as she confronted reality. Entitlement could not substitute for responsibility, and pride alone could not shield her from accountability. I watched as she struggled to regain composure, a sharp contrast to the bravado she had flaunted only weeks before. My parents, too, were cornered. Their years of condescension and public ridicule now reflected back in full clarity. Friends, acquaintances, and colleagues who had witnessed their behavior were quick to see the truth I had laid bare. The arrogance that had once shielded them now made their exposure all the more dramatic. Their cruelty, subtle or blatant, could no longer hide behind polished smiles or social pretense. The shift in the household was tangible. Where there had once been mockery and hierarchy, there was now recognition of truth and fairness. The empowerment Grandpa had intended for me was realized fully, not through confrontation alone, but through careful preparation, intelligence, and persistence. I had leveraged patience and strategy to transform years of injustice into a decisive victory. In reclaiming what was rightfully mine, I didn't just gain financial freedom. I had dismantled the facade of superiority my parents and sister had maintained, and in doing so, I secured a sense of dignity and control that no wealth alone could provide. Justice had been served, not through anger or revenge, but through careful planning, deliberate action, and the courage to demand what was always owed to me. The first morning in my new apartment felt different, lighter, unburdened. Sunlight streamed across the hardwood floors, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of judgment or expectation pressing down on me. The noise of their opinions, the constant comparisons, and the subtle manipulations no longer had a hold. This space, entirely my own, symbolized more than freedom. It was proof that I had reclaimed control over my life. I reflected on everything that had led me here. The endless belittling, the favoritism, the whispered doubts and public ridicule. Those wounds, once sharp and humiliating, had forged resilience. Each insult and dismissal had pushed me to observe, calculate, and adapt. I realized that intelligence was not just knowledge, but patience and strategy, and self-worth came from recognizing my own capabilities rather than relying on their approval. Betrayal had been a brutal teacher, but its lessons were invaluable, shaping me into someone who could navigate the world on her own terms. Looking out over the city from the window, I allowed myself a quiet smile. No one could undermine my achievements here. No one could claim authority over my choices. The freedom felt intoxicating. Not simply the independence of money, but the empowerment of knowing I had earned it in every sense, mentally, emotionally, and strategically. I had faced manipulation and cruelty head-on and emerged intact, stronger, and more assured than ever. I traced the skyline with my eyes, savoring the peace that came with self-reliance. My victories were not loud or dramatic, but profound in their permanence. For the first time, I understood that winning wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about claiming my own life and refusing to be diminished. The shadows of their arrogance and favoritism no longer reached me. I had won not just wealth, but confidence, dignity, and the knowledge that I could thrive entirely on my own terms. Do you think I handled everything the right way by exposing my family and claiming what was mine? Or should I have stayed silent and given them another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.